Hey everyone, it's Zero and let's get right into it. What if I told you some of the most devastating events in human history weren't natural disasters but entirely self-inflicted? We often think about things like earthquakes or tsunamis when we talk about destruction. But the truth is, humans have a knack for exploiting the world around them, leaving scars that can last for generations. Today, we're diving deep into some of the most shocking examples of exploitation in history, from the Dust Bowl to the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. Stay tuned to uncover the exploitations that left scars on our world forever. Alright, let's rewind the clock back to the 1930s to the American Great Plains. Picture this, endless fields of golden wheat stretching as far as the eye can see, a symbol of American prosperity. But this image of abundance was short-lived. The story of the Dust Bowl is a harsh reminder of what happens when we push the land too far. For years, farmers had been encouraged to plow up the native grasslands of the Great Plains, spurred on by demand and a false promise of endless fertile soil. But they weren't taught about sustainable farming practices, and as the world plunged into the Great Depression, farmers desperately tried to make ends meet, pushing the land beyond its limits. Now, the Great Plains had always experienced droughts, but this time, something was different. Decades of intensive farming had stripped the land of its natural defenses. The topsoil, no longer anchored by deep-rooted grasses, was left vulnerable to the wind, and then, the winds came. Massive dust storms, some taller than skyscrapers, swept across the plains, turning day into night. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe, let alone farm. Can you imagine looking out your window and seeing a wall of dirt coming towards your home? The Dust Bowl wasn't just an environmental catastrophe, it was a human tragedy. Millions of people were displaced, forced to abandon their homes and livelihoods, becoming refugees in their own country. Families packed their meager belongings into rickety cars and headed west, desperate for a better life. These weren't just farmers, they were teachers, shopkeepers, entire communities uprooted by the consequences of unsustainable practices. The Dust Bowl serves as a stark warning from the past, a reminder that we can't ignore the delicate balance of nature. It's a story about the dangers of short-sightedness, of prioritizing immediate gain over long-term sustainability. And it's a story that, unfortunately, has been repeated in different forms throughout history. But the Dust Bowl also showed the resilience of the human spirit. From the ashes of this disaster, new conservation efforts arose. The government implemented programs to teach farmers about soil conservation, and slowly, painstakingly, the land began to heal. Now let's travel to the heart of Africa, to the Congo Free State in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This is a story about greed, exploitation, and a brutal chapter in colonial history. At the center is King Leopold II of Belgium, who cloaked his greed in philanthropy. Leopold acquired the Congo through cunning and deception, not military might. He saw the Congo as a source of unimaginable wealth, centered on rubber. To extract this rubber, Leopold unleashed a reign of terror, forcing villagers to harvest rubber under brutal conditions. His agents, the Force Publique, were notorious for their cruelty. Villages that failed to meet quotas faced horrific punishments, including mutilation and death. One of the most chilling aspects was the use of severed hands as proof of kills. The Congo rubber atrocities are a horrifying testament to human cruelty. International outcry eventually forced Leopold to relinquish control, but the damage was done. The legacy of Leopold's reign continues to cast a long shadow over the region. Chapter 3. From the heart of Africa we journey now to the Amazon rainforest, often called the lungs of the planet. This vast expanse of green, teeming with life, plays a crucial role in regulating the Earth's climate, but it's facing an unprecedented threat: deforestation. For centuries, the Amazon has been home to indigenous communities who have lived in harmony with the forest, but in recent decades, the pressure on the Amazon has intensified, driven by a complex web of factors. One of the biggest drivers of deforestation is agriculture, particularly large-scale cattle ranching. Vast swaths of rainforest are being cleared, often illegally, to make way for grazing land. It's a familiar story of short-term profit over long-term sustainability. Then there's the demand for timber, particularly hardwoods like mahogany and teak, which are highly prized in international markets. Illegal logging is rampant in the Amazon, fueled by corruption and weak law enforcement. But it's not just about cattle and timber. Mining is another major threat to the Amazon. The rainforest sits atop vast reserves of gold, iron ore, and other minerals, and the lure of these riches has drawn in mining companies, both legal and illegal. Mining operations not only clear vast areas of forest, but they also pollute rivers and streams with toxic chemicals, poisoning the water sources that indigenous communities rely on. The consequences of deforestation are far-reaching. The Amazon plays a vital role in absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, helping to regulate global climate. As more and more forest is cleared, the Amazon's ability to absorb carbon dioxide is diminished, contributing to the climate crisis. Deforestation also leads to habitat loss, pushing countless plant and animal species closer to extinction. The Amazon is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, but this biodiversity is under threat. But it's not just about the environment. Deforestation also has devastating consequences for the indigenous communities who call the Amazon home. Their land is being stolen, their livelihoods destroyed, and their cultures threatened. Many indigenous groups have been fighting back against deforestation, often putting their lives on the line to protect their ancestral lands. Chapter 4. Our journey through history's darkest chapters brings us now to the transatlantic slave trade, a period of unimaginable cruelty and exploitation that spanned centuries. It's a story that's painful to tell, but it's a story that needs to be told, because the legacy of slavery continues to shape our world today. For over 400 years, from the 16th to the 19th centuries, millions of Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic Ocean, ripped from their homes and families and sold into chattel slavery in the Americas. This horrific trade was driven by greed, pure and simple. European powers, eager to exploit the vast resources of the New World, needed a cheap and readily available labor force, and they found it in the bodies of enslaved Africans. The transatlantic slave trade wasn't just about economics. It was built on a foundation of racism and dehumanization. European slave traders justified their actions by viewing Africans as inferior, as less than human. The conditions on the slave ships were horrific. Africans were packed into cramped, unsanitary quarters, chained together, and subjected to unimaginable cruelty. Many died during the long and perilous journey, their bodies tossed overboard like so much cargo. Those who survived the journey faced a life of forced labor on plantations, working under brutal conditions, with no rights and no hope of freedom. The transatlantic slave trade wasn't just an atrocity, it was a crime against humanity. It left an indelible stain on the world, shaping the demographics, economies, and social structures of entire continents. The legacy of slavery is still felt today in the form of systemic racism, inequality, and the ongoing struggle for social justice. Chapter 5. Our final destination takes us to the seemingly idyllic islands of the Pacific Ocean, a region often associated with paradise. But beneath the surface of this tropical paradise lies a dark secret, a legacy of exploitation and destruction: nuclear testing. In the wake of World War II, as the world entered a new era of geopolitical tension, the United States and other world powers embarked on a dangerous arms race, eager to develop the most powerful weapons ever conceived: nuclear weapons. And where did they choose to test these weapons? On remote islands in the Pacific Ocean, far from their own shores, often without the consent or even the knowledge of the indigenous populations who called these islands home. From the 1940s to the 1960s, the Pacific became a testing ground for these devastating weapons. Atolls were vaporized, islands were rendered uninhabitable, and the long-term consequences of radiation exposure continue to haunt the region. One of the most well-known examples is Bikini Atoll, part of the Marshall Islands. In 1954, the United States detonated a thermonuclear device over Bikini Atoll, codenamed Castle Bravo. The explosion was far more powerful than anticipated, resulting in widespread radioactive contamination. The inhabitants of Bikini Atoll were forcibly relocated, becoming nuclear nomads, displaced from their ancestral lands. The legacy of nuclear testing in the Pacific is a stark reminder of the human cost of the arms race. It's a story about the dangers of unchecked power, the arrogance of nations willing to sacrifice the well-being of others in the pursuit of military dominance. And it's a story that continues to this day, as the people of the Pacific grapple with the long-term health and environmental consequences of nuclear testing. From the dust storms of the American heartland, to the rainforests of the Amazon, from the shores of Africa to the islands of the Pacific, the history of human exploitation is a sobering reminder of our capacity for both destruction and resilience. These stories are not just events of the past, they are echoes that resonate in the present, shaping the world we live in today. But amidst the darkness, there are glimmers of hope. We've seen how communities have come together to rebuild after devastation, how activists have fought tirelessly for justice, and how the human spirit can triumph even in the face of unimaginable adversity. I believe history connects us all, revealing who we are and where we're going. By understanding the mistakes of the past, we can chart a more just and sustainable course for the future. Let's learn from these stories, amplify the voices of those who have been silenced, and work together to create a world where exploitation is not the norm, but a relic of the past. What are your thoughts on these stories of exploitation? Share your reflections in the comments below, and let's continue the conversation.